Good afternoon. Today I have the honor of introducing Ambassador Meron Reuben, who is the Consul General of Israel to New England. Welcome to our studio.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here.
I didn't introduce myself, so I will do that. My name is Mark Linde, and I'm the station manager here at Stoughton Media Access, and this is my first interview in our nice studio here in Stoughton. So, first of all, just welcome to Stoughton. We're glad to have you here. It's an honor. It's like an honor and a privilege to have someone as esteemed as you here in my studio.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here in Stoughton. Not my first time. The fact that there is a very small Jewish community, both here and in the neighboring towns, has allowed me, in the beginning, when I arrived some 8 months ago, to reach out. And unfortunately, it's still been in Zoom encounters, but to reach out to also people in Stoughton and to start meeting people. But now, 8 months down the line, I'm starting to arrive in person, and I must admit that I prefer 3D encounters to 2D encounters.
You and me both, right? I always go out and say three-dimensional people, live and in person, because everything's, due to COVID, has gone technological and on Zoom. When I'm teaching my classes, when I'm going to synagogue, even our local Rotary Club, we're on Zoom. We haven't missed a beat since COVID started. Every Wednesday morning at 7:30 a.m. So,
well, that's very impressive. Yes, I think I'm zoomed out, I would say. I definitely think it's a very important medium, that it allows people with disabilities and people who cannot get to a meeting to participate. But at the same time, nothing can replace meeting a person in person. And the third dimension of the surrounding, I think, is so important. That's what I like about a meeting. And my job as a diplomat, as Israel's Consul General to New England, is to meet people and to be out and about.
Absolutely. Everything, government has gone on Zoom, schools have gone on Zoom. See, I'm a handshaker and a hugger. It's going to be hard for me to adapt to this going forward. But I learned, I'm a member of the Mass Teachers Association in a union, and we just had a gathering, a picnic, a summer picnic, and they had a good idea. They had, for the name tags, a green, a yellow, and a red dot. If you wanted to be hugged or a handshake, it's green. If you were cautious, it's a fist bump and an elbow bump on yellow. And if you don't want anyone to go near you and be 6 feet away, it's red. So I started out yellow and then I went to green because I couldn't help myself. But I used the zoomed out slogan too, because we were just deciding whether we were going to meet in person again for Rotary last week. And we decided half the club wants to meet in person and half the club wants to stay on Zoom. So we'll figure out a way to do a hybrid. That's what they're doing with meetings and everything else. So while we're on the subject of COVID and things like that, I might jump around a little bit with the questions, but I pulled today from the Times of Israel and the Wall Street Journal this morning. We're at August 12th. I'll date it, but we'll air this a few times in August. And it said that 80% of Israel is vaccinated, but they're suffering another COVID-19 surge. And you and I were talking about that off camera. So would you elaborate on that a little bit? Because Israel has been a leader in pandemic mitigation efforts over the course of time.
Correct. As you mentioned, 80% of the 12 and above population have been vaccinated, which is very impressive, even worldwide. We were one of the first countries with a fast rollout of the vaccination. And that is why we are now already in the booster stage of a third vaccination. The statistics that we have and that were done on the 1.8 million people who had been vaccinated by the end of January 2021 showed that the vaccination was beginning to wane in its capacity to keep one away from some of the variants, especially the Delta variant, which has unfortunately taken over in Israel. So the decision was made a few weeks ago to be the first country in the world to provide a booster to anybody who had their second vaccination over 5 months ago and is over the age of 60. So this is something that has been very, very impressive, and in 2 weeks more than 600,000 Israelis have been vaccinated of the over 60, and we're closing in on 50% of that percentage of the population, which of course is very important. The Israelis will now, of course, allow within a few weeks' time younger people to also receive a booster of the vaccine, and I think that the other countries, of course, Germany and the United Kingdom, are also already heading towards booster vaccines, and I think that the United States will also come in within a few weeks or months into the idea of booster vaccinations as well.
So out of the population, when we were talking before, you said
80%.
80%.
Yes.
How many? What's the population?
The population of Israel is some 9.4 million, but we do have a very large young population, much larger than in most of the OECD countries, and larger than in the United States. And so of the above 12 and the 12 and above average, it's 80% of the population. Some 5.6 million, if I'm not mistaken, people have had already 2 vaccinations in Israel. And as I mentioned, another some 600,000 have had the booster.
Is there vaccine hesitancy in Israel like there is in this country?
Yes, there is vaccine hesitancy in people who fear maybe the religious connotations of how a vaccine is made, though it's not always correct. Then you would have people who are less inclined to believe in the government and feel that something is amiss. But I think that this vaccine and what we're seeing is something totally different, because first and foremost, the success rate is above 90%, which doesn't happen in any flu vaccine. The flu vaccines are anywhere between 40 and 60% on a good year.
Right.
And here we have a vaccine that actually gives you a 90% coverage of the virus, and so I do understand the hesitancy, because people say it's a new vaccine, we don't know what happens, what could happen, etc. And I can understand why, especially parents might not want to give the vaccine to the children. But we have really not seen any problems of the vaccine, and I definitely am a great supporter of medicine, maybe being the son of a doctor. So I presume that, yes, I do believe in vaccines. I think that we wouldn't be where we are at the moment in the world without them. My 2 great-grandparents died due to the Spanish influenza in 1919, leaving quite a few orphans in the United Kingdom, and I think it's something that is stuck in the family memory.
Okay, I got a cue, but I didn't see the time frame. I think we're at. I think we have 5 minutes in this segment left. Okay, and we will edit it. One thing I did say, I wouldn't mind putting in some promos for the state of Israel or tourism or whatever, because again, that's on my list. I have never had a chance to make Aliyah and go to Israel. My parents did, and my mother had her adult bar mitzvah in Israel, but didn't have to study for it and had the certificate on my wall. my ex-wife was a convert, and she did have to study for a year to do her bar mitzvah, so she was kind of jealous of that. It was kind of interesting, but I have some family there. Yes. My family went from Eastern Europe to two places, Israel and Cuba. And then my dad came to the United States, came to St. Louis first, Nashville, Tennessee. He learned his English with a Southern accent, and but he was born in Cuba. So I need to go to Cuba, I need to go to Israel, and I also need to go to the United Kingdom because my wife now, her great-grandparents got married in Sandys Row in England, and I would like to see where they got married. Her grandmother was Hannah Israel. I don't think you can get more Jewish than that. But all around the world, you know, we're everywhere.
I think we all have very interesting family histories, and it's something that I am very interested in myself. Like your family arrived both in Israel and in Cuba and then went on to the United States. It depends which century I'm in, but on my mother's side, we think, we haven't got actual proof, but we think that they were expelled from Spain, went to Holland. From Holland, they divided. Part of the family going most probably to Curacao and ending up in Suriname, and then from Suriname to the United States. And the other part, which went from Holland to the area of St. Petersburg, and ended up in Lithuania, and from Lithuania at the end of the 19th century moved to South Africa, and then South Africa to the United States, to Great Britain, to Israel, to Australia.
Wow.
So that is, it's part of Jewish geography, I presume, that one place.
Absolutely. Australia was the one place my father always wanted to go, but never was able to get there, Australia and New Zealand. He traveled, but not that much. My wife's family was Holland, Amsterdam, and they went to London from there.
Yes.
So it's on. I have travel for like envy because I want to go every place. I used to be a travel agent back in college, but I never could go because I was working full time and going to school full time down at the U in Miami. So I told my crew, we're going to do a break at 14. I think we're going to stay through it because I'm enjoying the conversation. I think we can make a half an hour, no problem. So I wanted to ask you, obviously with a new government, there's press and publicity and misconceptions, okay? Benjamin Netanyahu was the prime minister for a long time.
Well, yes, he was prime minister for 12 consecutive years. So it's always difficult to get used to new names, but Mr. Naftali Bennett has been Prime Minister for some 2 months now, and he heads what can only be described as Israel's most diverse coalition, both politically and culturally, in the history of modern Israel. We have right-wing parties, centrist parties, left-wing parties, and even the Muslim Islamic Party in Israel, which is also a member of the coalition. So all told, we have really a very special makeup of 8 parties in a coalition, but it's a razor-thin coalition. It was voted in 60 votes for and 59 against. So it is a very fragile coalition, but it's a very interesting and new coalition, which we're all trying to understand and get used to. So this is actually something that is really intriguing, but you know, Israeli politics has always been fascinating.
Yes, it is, and like unlike here, where you end up with one party or the other, you don't see coalition governments. I kind of wish you could, because if, you know, there are some states where the governor is one party and the lieutenant governor is another party. Not Massachusetts, it's not like that. And in Massachusetts right now, there's more unenrolled voters. I hate that term, independent. They're not a member of either party, and they kind of go back and forth. But watching Israel's and watching how those coalition governments are formed, it's pretty. No, there are other countries that
there
are like that.
There are other countries, Italy, for example. But at the same time, there are pluses and there are also minuses of coalitions, because it has a tendency to give a lot more power to the smaller parties, which then become the kingmakers in the parliament, and so it doesn't. It depends on the size of the parties, and at the moment in Israel, there are no really big parties. There are 2 medium-sized parties, and then all the rest are very small. Even though we have 120 members in the parliament, we have actually 13 parties that are in the Knesset. So we have only 2 parties that are above 10 seats, and all the rest, another 11 parties, are under 10 seats. And when the threshold of entering the parliament, you have to get at least 3.25% of the vote.
Okay, very interesting. So with a new government, there's new priorities, there's new challenges to overcome, and opportunities. Israel, to me, has always been the land of opportunity. Rose up out of a desert and was built with, there's beautiful trees in Israel that people can plant if they want something in someone's memory. There's agriculture. You know, everything I see, you know, that isn't like news or distorted or negative. It looks like a beautiful place. What myths would you like to dispel, you know, dealing with either the current government or Israel in general? We all deal with the media. We're local media. We're not the gotcha media. We're not the I-team. I'm not going to ask you controversial questions, but what would you like to get out there? Because you're introducing yourself to our communities and
well, I think as I mentioned when I first spoke in Stoughton and in Sharon, that Israel is not always what you expect. First and foremost, because it's very multi-ethnic, it's multicultural, and it is multiracial, which, especially when looking at the Jewish community in the United States, is quite different, because the majority of those who are in the Jewish community in the United States come mainly from immigrants in Central and Eastern Europe, whereas in Israel the different communities come from North Africa, from Ethiopia, from the Middle East, from East, West, Western Europe, and all over the world. There are people in Israel from over 140 nations on the planet, and it's definitely an exciting place to be, and not what you expect. So I think that this is something that is really great. And as you mentioned, trees, Israel is the only country on the face of this earth that started the 21st century with more trees than it started the 20th. And that is thanks to the tree planting of the Jewish National Fund, where some 270 million trees have been planted over the last 120 years. And this is something that has shown that desertification can be stopped, and actually the desert can be pushed back. And if you look at Israel, we have managed to push back the desert by anywhere between 60 and 100 miles south, because, you know, when Mark Twain came to the Holy Land, he said it was a desert. And actually the Turks, or the Ottoman Empire, used the whole area of what is today Israel, the Palestinian Authority, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, as their place for firewood for the empire. And so they denuded a lot of that area over 300 to 400 years, and that's why there was that desertification process, and we are trying to push back. But of course, new fuels like using the wonderful sun that we have all the time for producing energy, I think is something that is very, very important, and I think that is also something that people also don't usually get past the political headline to see what is going on both in science and ecology and all the different focuses in the different universities that are in Israel. And I think that this is something that is fascinating and important to put out there because Israel can be emanated and can be seen as a place of new things, of special things, and of helping the world, whether it be in water technology, whether it be in medical technology, whether it be in the health that we have for our citizens. We have digitalized health and have had it for nearly 2 decades, and it's definitely there.
You were ahead of the curve on COVID because I have a friend who works for American Well, which has Israeli owners, I believe. It's in Boston. I thought it was a well company, water well.
Yes.
It's Well Telehealth, and one of the partners is Israeli, from what I understand. So Israel's always on the cutting edge. Technology, you know, half of these things started there. But what about like climate change? Because Israel changed the climate and, you know, expanded the ecological footprint there, I would think with all our challenges that we're dealing with climate change, people might look to Israel for some of the solutions.
Well, yes, we do have some of the solutions, especially when it comes to do with the use of water and water management. I know that especially in New England and Massachusetts, there's no lack of rivers and lakes. Right. But at the same time, we have some of the world's largest desalination plants. Israel has 5 desalination plants along the coast, and some nearly 50% of our drinking water is from the sea. It's desalinated, and actually the price has begun to show it's a very compatible with regular water. Water, of course, is slightly more expensive than it is here in the United States, but I think that those the doomsayers, shall we say, who said that the future of the world would be wars over water, are incorrect, because so long as we have water in the sea, we'll be able to desalinate it and use it for the good of mankind, humankind, and animal kind.
Well, water is a big issue all over the world, and you know, being a Rotarian, we do a lot with water. All sorts of, one of the 5 major avenues of Rotary. I know there's active Rotary in Israel, yes, for sure. And I think I actually went, the National Library of Israel did a program, and it was for a Rotary. So I went during the COVID crisis over there. Had to, you know, balance the time zones and everything like that. So my next question, before we get too far in, is how about the life of an ambassador and a consul general? What's your day like? It can't be the same day twice. You're in all of New England, which is a beautiful area to be in.
That it is, and I think a lot of my colleagues around, or the Israeli colleagues around the United States, envy me because I can get into a car and drive anywhere in my jurisdiction. And my jurisdiction as Consul General of Israel to New England are the 6 northeastern states. So I cover, of course, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Though some of the distances in Maine are daunting, I must admit. I haven't yet officially visited Maine, but I definitely will go. Though I have crossed the frontier into Maine and visited for tourist reasons. I've actually been in all 6 of the northeastern states so far. and it really, as you mentioned, it's a beautiful area. You really are blessed with green and so much water, and I think that well, as global warming comes and we're sitting in a nice air-conditioned studio, but outside is close on 100 degrees, I think that you will be finding that the whole area of New England will actually be changing, and whereas the breadbasket is at the moment in the central United States, in future decades, if global warming continues, the breadbasket of the United States will be actually the area of New England.
Interesting. Well, it was still lucky we have farms in different places. I'm in Bridgewater, about 15 miles south, and we have some farms. And we also, you know, I mean, there's a lot of agriculture. Maine is my favorite place. One of my colleagues here that works with me in the studio loves Maine too. I haven't been up there because of COVID last summer or so far this summer because I just got a new job, so I'm not going on vacation anytime soon. But when you go, it's beautiful. I went to the synagogue in, I think it was South Portland, Maine, and there's a peace group up there that tries to bring folks together, okay? And I think one of the other big myths is that the treatment of people in Israel that aren't Israelis, that are Arabs, Palestinians. I keep hearing about that negatively. See, back in junior high, my geography teacher is the guy that had us look at current events, and that was when the 1974 war was. So that's when I started to learn, when I was in 7th grade, more about Israel. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, the Yom Kippur War, as you mentioned, was actually Israel's last war that was fought between armies of the nations in the Middle East. Because ever since then we've been fighting non-state actors. Actually, Israel, that is also something quite different. We've been fighting non-state actors, whether it be the Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip, whether it be the Hezbollah terrorist organization in the southern Lebanon, which is granted part of Lebanon's government, but it's a non-state actor. On the Syrian side, you've also got splinter groups after 10 years of course, civil war in Syria. So the situation is actually very interesting in that the last great war, as you said, was in between armies of countries, was in 1973.
Do you mind going longer than the half an hour? Because I got the 1 minute cue, and I'm not done, and I'm sure you're not done. If I don't want to mess up your schedule. Okay. Fine. So continue. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so the situation which we're in at the moment is, of course, complicated. I know that it might sound like a cliche, but when people try to understand, and especially the younger generation today, try to understand the situation or what is going on just from what they read on their telephone, on their smart screen, you can't learn everything from a meme or from a very short version. You really have to try and immerse yourself and understand what is going on in the region. So the nascent state of Israel in 1948, which was set up when the League of Nations and then the United Nations divided the British mandate into two countries, one Jewish country and one Arab country. The Arab country in 1948 was never set up. The Jordanians occupied what they then turned or changed the name from Judea and Samaria into the West Bank. And the Egyptians occupied the Gaza Strip. And from 1948 to 1967, No Arab or Palestinian Arab state was set up, and only Israel existed. Then in 1967, Israel took over not only Judea and Samaria again and the Gaza Strip, but also the Golan Heights from Syria and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. Over the years, of course, we came to agreements, peace agreements with some of our neighbors. With Egypt, we returned the whole of the Sinai Peninsula. We actually did offer the Gaza Strip to the Egyptians, but they said no. And a peace agreement with the Jordanians. We nearly reached a peace agreement with the Lebanese. We have had our border demarcated in accordance with the help of the United Nations. So the Israeli-Lebanese border has been demarcated. Well, with Syria, the situation still remains flexible. In 1993, the Oslo Accords, we reached a temporary arrangement with the Palestinians, which was meant to be temporary. Mm-hmm. But we're already nearly 28 years down the line, and we're still in this temporary situation, whereby a situation in which we should have learnt to, or should have surpassed this period a long time ago, mm-hmm. Because of intransigence, some would say on the Israeli side, I would say on the Palestinian side, because Israel has definitely offered solutions over the decades on how to reach an agreement, were never accepted on the Palestinian side. We've seen that through Camp David and through different suggestions, and unfortunately we are left in a sort of hiatus whereby nothing is being accepted on the Palestinian side, and we are still in this interim period, which shouldn't have lasted 28 years.
Yeah.
So into this, of course, comes all the understandings. You have the Israeli population, which has an Arab minority in the what you would call the pre-67 ceasefire lines, because borders they are not.
Right.
The ceasefire, which was signed between 1949 and 1951, which led to the 1967 ceasefire lines, and all those non-Jewish citizens who are in that area have equal rights as citizens of the State of Israel. Then you have the citizens who live in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and there you have a different situation. So, you know, when people talk about Palestinian Arabs, well, they're also Palestinian Jews, but when you talk about Palestinian Arabs, there are two, I would say even three distinct regions. The Gaza Strip, which is at the moment under the dominion of the Hamas, the Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, under the dominion of the Palestinian Authority, and those Arabs who have continued to live in Israel, who are Israeli citizens. Yes, there is quite a difference and quite a difficult situation to understand. And we're all in an area the size of New Jersey.
Right, right, exactly. Surrounded on all sides.
Well, I include Judea, Samaria, the Gaza Strip, and Israel is the size of New Jersey, approximately. So yes.
Fascinating. Do you think in your lifetime you will see true peace in the Middle East? And what is your new Prime Minister's, top 5 list? This is going to be. I remember very well, because I had Jimmy Carter come and visit my high school when he was running for president, and he managed to get Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat together.
Correct.
Bill Clinton tried different things, you know.
Well, Bill Clinton got Rabin and Arafat together as well.
Right.
Yes.
So we now have two new leaders. We have a new leader in this country, and we have a new leader in Israel. Okay. Do you see hope in that new leadership? That, you know, I mean, Joe Biden was chair of the Foreign Relations Committee when he was a United States Senator. And
well, yes, definitely there's hope. First and foremost because last year we saw the first agreements between Arab countries and Israel in the nearly 3 decades since the Oslo Accords, whereby we signed normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, and with Morocco and with Sudan. So actually, only today, the Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid is actually in Morocco, and he cut the ribbon on the liaison office in Rabat and signed agreements that we will reopen embassies within another 2 months. So yes, things are definitely moving in the Middle East. And then don't always have to do with the Palestinians or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So yes, I think that the Middle East is seeing Israel more and more as part of the region, and I think that this is very, very important. I think that we could definitely say, I'm an optimist, I've always been an optimist, and I think I'll continue to be an optimist, that we will be able to see peace, and I definitely hope in our lifetime. It's the will of the leaders and the peoples. Just 2 weeks ago, I had youth come from the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, who talked about the openings and the accords that have been built up, and the changing ideas or the change of thought in the different countries. For example, since the opening up of the United Arab Emirates, we've had more than 250,000 Israelis have traveled to the United Arab Emirates, to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, as tourists. And it's a miraculous change. Don't forget that in Israel, there are more than 1 million descendants of people who come from Morocco. And we now have direct flights between Israel and Morocco. And so, yes, we're definitely seeing the changes, and we're feeling the winds of change. We hope that these winds of change reach our most immediate neighbors, the Palestinians as well. But I definitely think that instead of lobbing rockets at us, I think they could try sending doves of peace.
Sounds good to me, and I think the young people will drive that too. You mentioned youth. And I think, you know, people younger than us, I mean, obviously we want peace too, but I think there's more of an openness for younger people that don't want things to continue the way they are. And I personally think the Palestinians will come to reasonable thoughts. At least that's my hope and my prayer. So lastly, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what's in the news, okay? The boycott, divestiture, BDS, what is that? What's the last?
Boycott, divestment, and
sanctions. Okay,
yes.
So heard a lot about that.
Yes.
And the latest one we've heard about is featuring one of the most popular brands of ice cream in this country, Ben & Jerry's, okay? I don't think people know the story behind the story, or what's that all about. Can you explain it to get people to understand?
It's not only one of the most popular brands in the United States, it is actually the most popular brand of ice cream in Israel, believe it or not. Israel is one of 3 countries in the world where Ben & Jerry's ice cream is actually produced. And the involvement of Bennett Cohen and Jerry Greenblatt in Israel started a good few decades ago. But as you know, the company was sold off to Unilever, left with a very interesting so-called independent board of directors, who have unfortunately sided with a very virulent anti-Israeli group called BDS, who not only want to stop Israel's development and also, of course, focus in on what our Prime Minister called economic terrorism, but they would also like to see the eradication of the State of Israel from the map. And unfortunately, they have hijacked the well-being of what I think of social justice, at least when it comes to Ben & Jerry's focusing in on Israel. And instead of trying to bring more proximity and interesting ideas and bring the two people closer together, the actual board is calling for a boycott or the stopping of sales of Ben & Jerry's ice cream to Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip. Well, there is nothing in the Gaza Strip, and in East Jerusalem as well. But we have a slight problem. You can't just decide. First and foremost, there's a license. The license to provide goes on until the end of 2022. So actually, they can't stop it, and the rules and regulations is that you cannot differentiate or boycott within Israel. And it's not as if Ben & Jerry's actually have ice cream shops all over Israel. They don't.
Right.
There's one ice cream shop, if I'm not mistaken, and they are sold in freezers all over the state of Israel. Ben & Jerry's actually has some 49% of the ice cream market of Israel. Very astute business focus there. In fact, if you go into practically any supermarket or any mini market in Israel, you'll see a a separate Ben & Jerry's refrigerator, which is and their ice cream is sold apart. So there's been a very, very good focus. So actually, it's the most eaten ice cream in the state of Israel. And I think that the decision by the board hasn't taken a lot of things into consideration. First and foremost, the fact that they cannot divide unless they're going to send a commando from Vermont and stop the ice cream from rolling along the roads of Israel and try and take them out of some of the supermarkets and the mini markets where they are. It will also most probably, if they don't backtrack, bring about maybe the closure of and the loss of 160 jobs of both Arabs and Jews and immigrants and also Palestinians who work with Ben & Jerry's there. So it's once again complicated, unfortunately. And we would hope that they would rethink what is going on and backtrack, because there are many other things that they can do to bring about the connecting between the two societies, instead of adding to the division and adding to the and bring about discourse instead of bringing about unity.
I always look at it with different cultures. Food, music, family are things that bind everybody together, and people want the same things. You want a good job, a good education, and a safe place to live. So that spans across all the different cultures. So I want to turn it around for a second and ask you if you want to talk about anything that I haven't already brought up, any goals and objectives that either your Prime Minister has, your government has, or anything you want to communicate.
Well, first and foremost, I hope that you do get to visit Israel. It's definitely a fascinating place. Even though it's small, it has so much diversity. whether it be in historical sites, whether it be in religious sites, whether it be in even modern architecture. And if you come during the summer, you can definitely enjoy the beaches. And to float in the Dead Sea, the lowest point on the face of the earth, is definitely a wonderful sensation, and it's something that mustn't be missed. But we here are focused in on improving the connections between Israel and New England, Israel and Massachusetts, thanks to a very focused commitment by both Governor Baker and the previous governor, Duval Patrick. They have focused in on connecting Massachusetts to Israel, and I think that this is something very important. Maybe you don't know, but the greater Boston area is the second largest concentration of Israeli companies in the United States.
I did not know that.
Some 250 Israeli companies who actually provide quite a lot of employment to Massachusetts, and some have even shown that the Israeli companies actually are approximately 4% of the GDP of Massachusetts. So yes, it is something that is very impressive, and I think other states in the region are also interested in attracting Israeli companies, especially Rhode Island and Connecticut. And I think that we have a lot to do to increase the markets. There's a lot of interconnectivity, both between academic centers, between high-tech centers, artificial intelligence. There's so much that can be done, and even the expat Israeli community is relatively large here. Over 30,000 in Massachusetts, and I would say over 40,000 in the whole of New England. So yes, that's also something that we deal with here, and the connectivity. We also are very, very interested in what goes on in academia. This, of course, is the center of learning for the leadership of the United States, without doubt. I was talking with the president of Harvard, who was happy to tell me that more than 10% of the members of the 117th Congress actually studied in Harvard, and that's just one school in the region. So yes, the area of New England has a very, very important position to play, both in American leadership and in the future of the United States. And I think that is why we should definitely be here and be involved, and try to enlarge the context that we have here.
Well, we're here to help you get the connections, to communicate your messages, kind of uncut and unfiltered. You know, if you go on the news media or in Boston, you're on for a minute 30 or 30 seconds or whatever, and you can edit things out, you can change the meaning of what people say. But on cable access, community television across the state, you get the whole story. So anything we can do to help you out in the future, to communicate, anything we can showcase. Public access is free speech for the community. People can go on and do stuff. They can also do stuff completely the opposite of what we're doing. They can, you can have the other side, so to speak. You and I, you being a diplomat and me being a community person, we like to see unity in the community. We like to see people getting along, working together. So I thank you for the honor of having your staff outreach to us to be here on Stoughton Media Access.
Well, thank you very much for having me in Stoughton. It's a pleasure, and it definitely won't be my last visit. I definitely love the area, and I think that there is so much that we can do and cooperate on, and of course meet the local population.
Well, welcome to Stoughton, and we'll definitely have you back. This is Mark Linde. I had the honor of having Meron Reuben, the Consul General of Israel to New England. Big title. Nice guy. We share the same birth year. And I just look forward to getting more information and meeting up with you again. And maybe if you go on a road trip to Maine, I'll kind of maybe tag along.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
A pleasure to meet you.
Same here.